Well, thank you so much, Emily, for the nice introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope this will be a productive and positive time together. I love what you said about being solutions oriented. Sometimes we feel very depressed maybe when we're reading the local news, and it's encouraging to me to have so many people here who are paying attention, who care, who want to be involved and want to be active in working towards solutions. So thank you to Americans for Prosperity. I love this prosperity is possible theme, and we can together change economic policies so that all of Americans can prosper, and that is the goal. Our economic failures right now, we know, are as a result of widespread government intrusion, people thinking government is the answer and the solution to all of our problems. Washington, though, continues to offer the same tired solutions that never work, that never can work because they don't work. And so Ronald Reagan, I think, always said it best. And like Emily said, I worked for President Reagan for 10 years, and my kids always make fun of me. They said, "Mom, is there a Reagan quote for everything?" And yes, there actually is. So you're going to get a few of them today. But we know that Reagan famously said that government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. And so I think we all realize that today. And I love in his 1981 inaugural address, and if any of you are nerdy like me, I revisit it frequently. And there was a couple of nuggets I pulled out that I thought were really appropriate. And if you want to be inspired again, just go back and listen to it. I especially like listening it instead of reading because you hear his voice and it just, I don't know, makes you smile, makes you feel safe, makes you feel patriotic. But in that same remarks at his inaugural, he said the federal government did not create the states created the federal government. And he said, it's not my intention to do away with government, rather it's my intention to make it work with us, not over us, to stand by our side, not ride on our backs. Government can and must provide opportunity, not smother it, foster productivity, not stifle it. Don't we say amen to that? The crisis we're facing today requires our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds, to believe together that with God's help we can and will resolve the problems which confront us now. After all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. And what a great reminder his words are to us still today in that timeless Reagan-esque way. So we know that there's a better way, and today we're going to hear from some great experts on this about sensible ways that we can make government work for us and with us instead of against us. We see great government overreach right now, and it's time for government to get out of the way and unleash the prosperity and the possibility in the American people. So today we're going to specifically talk about solutions in 3 areas: ways that we can lower inflation, unleash energy abundance, and empower the workforce. And we're going to talk about this in productive and positive ways. For those of us who need a reminder, and there's maybe a few people in the room who remember the 1970s, but if you remember the 1970s, inflation was high, taxes were high, unemployment was high, and worst of all, American morale was incredibly low. But those of us who remember that great day in January of 1981 when Ronald Reagan was sworn in as President of the United States, we remember that everything changed on that day. And even though maybe everything was the same numbers-wise in America, everything changed because he talked about America in a totally different way. He made us feel like things were possible again. It's morning in America. There's a new dawn ahead. There's a shining city on the hill, and we all get to be part of it. He created this new environment where we once again believed that we could do and create and innovate, and we were inspired to do that. It was a call to action that rallied all of us, and those of us who listened, we believed that it was possible. And those of us who experienced the prosperity that was unleashed during those 8 years, we realized what happens when government does get out of the way. And as only Reagan could talk about at the end of his 8 years, what I loved was when you asked him, what was the thing you were most proud of? It wasn't, well, I did this or I did that, or talked about the things that he did. He, without hesitation, said the thing I'm most proud of that I did as President of the United States was I made the American people believe in themselves again. I unleashed the possibility, the prosperity, the innovation, the inspiration, the creativity, the entrepreneurship of every American. That was unleashed under Reagan. And so rather than being proud of himself, he was proud of all of you. And so while some of us may not be happy about the direction of the nation right now, in 1970s, we had no idea that Ronald Reagan was just around the corner and that things could turn around so quickly and put us on an entirely new path. And so while we're looking at these really difficult times right now, let us not lose hope and realize that the future depends not just on the next leader that we put into the White House, but it depends on all of us. And so what is the role that we can play? What are the roles that people in the private sector and in government here in Pennsylvania can play? And I just wanted to frame it in that way because prosperity is possible, and it depends not just on one person, but on all of us. So we have some incredible panelists with us here today, so I want to give them all time to speak and to share their insights and their wisdom with us. I'll just go from right next to me down the line. I know a lot of you know Representative Rob Mercuri. Thank you so much for joining us today. He was raised in West Deer, Pennsylvania, and he's the proud son of a dedicated blue-collar family. His family is one of hard work and service, roots in the steel mills and the oil fields of Western Pennsylvania, and he served in uniform for many years. Thank you so much for your service. He graduated from Deer Lakes High School, and he attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, earning a commission as a lieutenant in the Army, and deployed to two tours in Iraq as an intelligence officer, and a member of the Embedded Military Training Unit. While he was in the Army, he attained the rank of captain and earned the Bronze Star Medal for his service. So thank you for all you did to defend and protect our nation. He later earned an MBA by taking night classes from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and after stints with two major accounting firms, he was recruited by Pittsburgh-based PNC Bank, where he rose to Senior Vice President of Risk and Finance. So as we're talking about inflation and budgeting, you certainly are the expert in that. Seeing a need for leadership in state government, he ran for and won a seat in the Pennsylvania General Assembly in 2020 and was reelected in 2022. During this time in legislature, he has authored legislative reforms in the areas of education, finance, autonomous transportation, and data privacy. He's been a champion for things that we're going to talk about here today, so you're a perfect panelist to have: fiscal responsibility, economic development through innovation, lower tax rates, and reduce barriers to entry for entrepreneurs. And that's one thing that we're going to talk a lot today about as well, getting regulations out of the way of people. Active in his faith and community, Mercuri and his family live in Pine Richland, where you and your wife Kelsey own and operate a small business and are raising 3 school-aged children. So please join me in welcoming Representative Mercuri today. And then we have Senator Devlin Robinson. He was elected in 2020 to serve residents of the 37th Pennsylvania State Senatorial District, which includes parts of Allegheny County. Robinson was raised in the Brookline neighborhood on the south end of Pittsburgh, and at the conclusion of high school, he joined the United States Marine Corps. We're not going to have any
Never.
All right, we're not going to have any battles here. Continuing the tradition of family military service, thank you for serving our great nation. Following the 9/11 attacks, Robinson requested assignment in the infantry and served 1 combat tour in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. He also later served in Fallujah. Upon honorable discharge, he returned to Pittsburgh, founded his own company, also earned an MBA, I feel terribly undereducated here, at the University of Pittsburgh's Katz School of Business. You currently serve as the chair of the Labor and Industry Committee and vice chair of the Law and Justice Committee, along with being members on many other committees. He's committed to fellow veterans, continues to serve outside of Harrisburg as well, serving on veterans organizations and many other charitable organizations around southwestern Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today, and please join me in welcoming and thanking Senator Robinson. And on the end, last but not least, we have Jezree Friend, who is the Manufacturer and Business Association's Assistant Vice President of External Relations. He builds strong relationships with Pennsylvania's state and federal elected officials, the media, and the public. He manages the MBA's Government Affairs Department, Political Action Committee, and lobbies on behalf of a pro-business agenda. We're glad you're here. He's recently been named to the city and state's prestigious Pennsylvania's 40 under 40. I lie and say I'm 39, but it's nice to have to still actually be able to say that you're under 40. An honor is given to the most prominent leaders in Pennsylvania government, advocacy, labor, business, academia, and media. He's moderated television forums for Pennsylvania's candidates for governor and U.S. Senate, has led roundtable discussions with presidential cabinet members, and testified in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and writes regularly opinion pieces in newspapers across Pennsylvania. He's also had commentary included internationally in Australia, in Great Britain, Wall Street Journal, Sydney Morning News, Herald, and others. So thank you so much for joining us today. So again, going to a great Reagan quote from the inaugural address, and this will set up our conversation today. He said, "It's no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives that result from unnecessary and excessive growth of government. We're not, as some would have us believe, though, doomed to inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing." And so I appreciate not only the panelists being people of action, but for each one of you being willing to do something. And whether you're already in that role or going to start that journey today, we're glad you're here today and hope you will enjoy the discussion. So we're going to start with probably the most obvious and most painful. This obviously is a national issue, but something affecting Pennsylvanians as well, and that's inflation. AFP highlights inflation and its harmful costs and the overbearing regulations that add to that. And I want to talk a little bit specifically about in the Pennsylvania House and Senate, even though there's not a lot you can do on the federal level, what are the things, and maybe I'll start with Senator Robinson, that you can do in the Pennsylvania Senate and also in the House that might move the needle on this issue and provide some sort of relief to Pennsylvanians?
Well, one of the things that's causing our inflationary crunch is the war on energy. And, you know, Pennsylvania, and especially Western Pennsylvania, has an abundant amount of natural gas underneath our feet. And doing away with the regulations and the misinformation war that's coming from the left is paramount to reducing inflation and getting people to be able to feed their families. And you know, it's dumbfounding. You know, I mean, we've been in this this energy war for, has to be 40 years now, since before your former boss came in. And that was, you know, all three of us have served over in the Middle East. And that was whenever the United States was not even the main energy exporter in the world. Now we are, and now all we can do is curse what has brought us that type of prosperity. And so, you know, that's the main thing. More abundant energy will lead to prices to be more reasonable, and people will be able to start feeding their families and start spending responsibly again.
Representative, what is the House doing specifically to address the pain that Pennsylvanians are feeling as a result of the national debt and inflation?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's very relevant to our time in the moment we are in and a lot of our national discourse. I would like to start by just saying thank you to you, Peggy, for being here, and to AFP for hosting this nice event, for all of you for being here and gathering to discuss a really important set of topics. And I would agree with the theme here, and certainly President Reagan, that prosperity is not only possible, but it's fundamental for us. And you know, I'm here and was excited to participate, to talk to you all about that. I was also excited just to listen to your Reagan stories and Reagan quotes, which I look forward to.
Good, I have a few more.
I did read your book on the way out to Harrisburg, which I'll mention. It's worth taking a look at. on audiobook on the way out to Harrisburg. And I know Devlin
That was
listens.
your co-pilot.
You
sounds
were my
like.
co-pilot.
Excellent.
Devlin listens to Metallica on the way out. But,
Correct.
I can't
try to
compete with
inform
Metallica.
myself.
I'm
Guns N'
sorry.
Roses is coming to Pittsburgh next week. I'll be there.
So on inflation, I think it's important for us to realize the drivers of why inflation happens. And I agree completely with Devlin that one of the antidotes is industrial production, and we've got a gold mine under our feet in terms of energy in Pennsylvania, and in particular in the West. And we're abandoning that part of the solution by saying that it's off limits, we can't grow that aspect of our economy. And we do need to continue to push for policies in the State House and in the Senate that will allow us to grow that portion of our economy. And the reason why growth is an antidote to inflation is because it creates real value. And inflation exists because there's too much disconnect between the value of money in the economy and the real value that it should represent. And so what causes inflation and what has caused the problem that we're in now, although it is somewhat abating, is the overspending in gigantic record amounts during and after the COVID pandemic, some of which you can argue was needed to soften the blow of the economic issues during COVID. But clearly, as we came out of COVID and the economy was coming back, and we had already done CARES Act 1, we didn't need to overreach and do CARES Act 2, and we didn't necessarily need to overreach and do the Inflation Reduction Act, which was actually a gift to Democratic interests, frankly, while President Biden.
How much has it reduced inflation?
It's not reduced inflation at all. It's made the problem worse.
Yeah, of course.
And so I think the first thing that the national economy needs to do is spend within its means, which is easier said than done, but it's important to say it. Now, at the state level, beyond energy policy, we have to also spend within our means. We do have a balanced budget, part of our Constitution, which thankfully prohibits us from borrowing incredible amounts, which if it wasn't there, believe me, when it's one administration or another, they would love to overspend and borrow, and the federal government has done that repeatedly. So we've got to spend within our means is the simple answer to your question.
Just like every household, every business
That's right.
is expected to do it, and I don't know why that is such a rare concept for governments. Jezree, in the business community, the private sector, what would you like to see coming out of Harrisburg that would help not only individuals, but small businesses, large businesses, and not just the ones that are here, but a growth for Pennsylvania? What would put you on a better track to incentivize new businesses to come here? Not just grow government, but grow the private sector.
Yeah, and want to thank Americans for Prosperity for allowing me to participate today, and do appreciate all your attention and obviously having I feel pretty flattered to be with such a great panel here and getting to meet Peggy today. She's such an amazing lady. But I would say is I think I'm limited by even just like an hour to answer your question on what do I want the government to do to help businesses in Pennsylvania. I have a long list.
Or maybe not do, too.
Yeah, to not do it.
Sometimes we don't want them to do it.
And that could be even easier, yeah. The simple, just from an economic standpoint, is how you reduce inflation is you control your spending or reduce it. And I'm not an elected official, so I can speak maybe even a little more frankly than, not that you guys wouldn't, but I would personally, and probably from my organization's standpoint, unapologetically say we slash some spending with a battle axe, right? But someone specifically, energy is the big one, right? Especially in Pennsylvania. People may not realize, I have obviously our interests representing a lot of the manufacturers in the state. Energy is one of the #1 inputs into manufacturing. It's one of their largest line item costs. And because the relative availability of so much energy in Pennsylvania specifically makes Pennsylvania unique and is a huge opportunity to be posing ourselves as an opportunity to grow manufacturing in Pennsylvania. However, our state government in their infinite wisdom has time and again failed to capitalize on this. We saw that most recently with the big, if you guys may be familiar, like 2 years ago or so, Intel, just north of Columbus, is putting in upwards of $100 billion with a B worth of investment just north of Columbus. Why didn't that come just to Western Pennsylvania? From where we're standing right now, it's like, I don't know, 2.5-hour drive, maybe? Missed opportunities. There's so much. We are actually, I might be wrong, and someone that might be better on these numbers than I believe PA is the second leading net exporter of energy in the country. That is no small thing to look at, right? That should be something we should be wearing with a badge of honor and being able to capitalize on so many other things. So how do you reduce inflation? Lower energy costs is one of the biggest ones. So any regulation that would prohibit or increase energy costs, which I think we're getting to maybe some of the regional greenhouse gas initiative conversations, so I don't want to jump ahead of that. Got a lot of thoughts on that. That would be a good place to start. A second option is something that I've worked on for a while now, and I know our friends at AFP has as well, is reducing healthcare costs by giving more choices to Pennsylvania, not just families, but specifically those small businesses is really where the kind of breaking point we found to be at, and that's like those businesses under 50 on how they buy their insurance, whether it's a small group or large group market. And I won't get into all the weeds and bore everybody about this, but I could talk about it for hours. But having legislation that would allow either businesses to have more opportunity, because as it stands right now, how they're governed, those businesses that have 50 or less employees have much higher rates than those on the large market. And by the way, it's exponential year over year. So it's not like, oh, I literally having members of ours telling me, hey, Jezree, we're having 86% increase this year, and it was a 38% increase last year. It's not like 38% over the last 10 years. Each year it's jumping. And so what's happening is those small businesses specifically are saying, do I give raises or do I keep providing health insurance, or can I afford to hire more people, right? All the time having to compete with larger businesses who can have more attractive, hiring packages and benefits packages rather. So now they're not competitive. So I'll stay away from my tangent that I'd love to get on.
We'll get there.
But reducing healthcare costs is an easy way, and there's very practical ways we can do this.
Yeah. Well, all of you touched on energy, which we're going to get to in greater depth, and especially here in Pennsylvania, it really is inseparable from talking about inflation, the economy, budgeting. But let's go back to budgeting and spending for just a minute, because you said that Pennsylvania has a balanced budget constitutionally written in. A lot of states do, and yet they don't necessarily adhere to that. Also, both the U.S. Congress and here in Pennsylvania, year after year, they don't necessarily even look at all the spending, because you don't look at discretionary spending and mandatory spending and revenue all at the same time. There's no way a business or even an individual could get away with that and make the books balance, which we see the books don't balance because they don't do that. And so what are some of the things that you think that what would it take to have Pennsylvania move more toward a comprehensive budgeting process, and also maybe looking at this balanced budget issue? Is that something that is being considered? What is that looking like, and is there any momentum or support for that?
Yeah, so Peggy, great question, and I'm glad that we're talking about this, because part of the way that we solve for the shadow budget, which is what we call it in Harrisburg when we're talking about this part of the budget, is that we've got to bring it out into the light so that people understand what it is and how costly it is to our growth and our economy. And so this room understands what it is that, and when you realize that a lot of the taxes we pay go into the regular budget, but that a lot of the fees that we pay go into the shadow budget, whether you're a bank or whether you're a motorist or if you're applying for a license in PA, all of those fees go somewhere, and they often go into special funds that exist from year to year, but they also accrue over time. And so while our appropriated budget from tax revenue is $45 billion this year and was just signed by the Senate and the governor and passed by both chambers, the shadow budget in reality is up to $80 billion a year. And so when you're thinking, and back to your point about just like a family needs to allocate the money that they have, we as a state need to every year appropriate and allocate and look at that $80 billion, which includes the shadow budget. And that's the appropriate way to think about our federal, our state government and its economy and its impact on the economy. And to a point that you made, Peggy, and that Jezree was bringing up, in terms of the interaction between the government and industry, it's relevant when we're talking about budgeting and policy to know that, oftentimes government regulation and legislation that's passed or regulation applied is directly harmful to the overall growth and trajectory of the economy. And so back to our point earlier and the theme of this conference, that prosperity is not only possible, but it's fundamental. As a society, we need to grow our economy or we can't provide for our families and for our people. And when government is recognized as an inhibitor, which it is, then the solution is, and should be obvious, we need to reduce regulation on the economy and business, and we need to allow job creators, entrepreneurs, not government agencies, to create value in the economy. And those of you who are here, who are on my Small Business Council, are owners and know that. And we look at government regulation as a threat, direct threat, to the health of our businesses. And so knowing all that, to the point about what do we need to do with the shadow budget and how do we stimulate the economy, we need to hold that shadow budget accountable year over year, and we need to make sure that in our discussions about public policy, we recognize that regulation is harmful to business growth overall. So that's the point I would make.
Yeah, great. Senator, do you think that sometimes part of government's goal is to make it seem so complicated, kind of have this shell game and, oh, just trust us because it's too hard for the average person to understand? Do you think that, not you, but do you think that government in general sometimes just wants to say, just send us the money and trust us? We know that sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And if people got to vote on their phone, yes, spend my money that way, no, don't spend my money that way, I think government would spend things very differently. Where does that stand? Is transparency something that is being considered, especially by people like you that are in government? I think that the American people on both sides of the aisle would love that and frankly deserve it. It's not government's money, it's our tax dollars, it's Pennsylvanians' hard-earned money. And so, like you said, I think that transparency would really help that, but I know that's usually the last thing that government wants. So I'll let you talk to that.
I'll keep it simple. Absolutely. We should make it as simple as possible, and we should show where that money is going. One of the benefits of being in the Senate, I fought to stay on the Appropriations Committee so that I get a balance sheet every day. There's 27 different departments in the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and then there's all the other ancillary offices that request funding through the government. And we have hearings, and they have to come and say, look, here was our budget last year. Here's what we spent that money on, and here's what we're requesting for next year, and here's what we plan to spend that money on. And it's up to your elected officials to go and ask the tough questions and say, well, you are requesting an increase. However, here's where you're stopping us from raising more revenue for the citizens of Pennsylvania. So why are you doing that? You want you want extra money, just like everybody else, because that's they present us with the dream budget, and we have to we work with what the projection of tax revenue is coming in, and we have to divide that. We have to we also, Rob and I have talked before, it's our job to govern. There's a lot of people that get elected and they don't believe that they're responsible for governing. It's one thing, to get government out of the way, but it's a totally another thing to make dysfunctional government. And so, that's our mission out there too, is to make government work for the people who are the shareholders, which are the citizens of Pennsylvania. So yes, I try to pick those budgets apart, and I believe in transparency. So I everything that you were just preaching. So I support.
So Jezree, we know that in general, government doesn't do anything well. They don't do it better than the private sector in general. Are there things that the business community here in Pennsylvania is doing well that may have opportunities to engage in like public-private sector initiatives? That was a big Reagan thing, the private sector initiatives office that he set up. Is there an appetite for working alongside and coming alongside government here in Pennsylvania to offer new solutions and do those in partnership with government? Is that something that would be receptive to both the business community and to the government?
I'd like to be romantic and say yes.
We can be romantic. We can dream for a moment.
I think there's a lot of distrust, right? Because of years of bad government, if you will, or disingenuous motivations. I'm probably going to steal one of your quotes because now I just thought of it. It was President Reagan said one of the most terrifying words was, "I'm from the government. I'm here to help." And so, especially when time and again business owners across the state have just been seen as not a priority, right? As they don't matter, they're just a number. And those of you, and I'm looking at a couple I know who are in the room who are members of my organization, and I know well, and I know you've experienced some of this, and we've had these conversations about it. They're trying to grow, they're trying to expand, but it's so much easier just to do it elsewhere, right? You talk about opportunities to come alongside, so there's something that probably isn't really the topic of today's conversation, but you talk about growth in Pennsylvania and prosperity, is we aren't as competitive with the states right next door to us. Ohio is just kicking our clock right now when they shouldn't be. I don't think they're better than us. I'm a Western PA guy, and so I might be a little bit biased. But, I was literally, I kid you not, last week, I went with my family on vacation, and we went and saw the ARC thing down in Cincinnati, and we drove through Columbus, and there's a big old sign on a billboard in Columbus, right outside their capital. It talked about, now I know it's not exactly how it is, but no corporate income tax, grow here. And I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? If Pennsylvania could say something like that, that would be nice. Things that Ohio do better than us, things like their permitting reforms, right? There's things, maybe it was well-intentioned, but I didn't see it as much of the governor recently had a proposal that, for certain permitting, that, if the business doesn't get their permit in X amount of days, they'll get their money back. Cool. You get your $100 back for a multi-million-dollar operation? I don't think they want their $100 back. How about in so many days you just put it into effect? Because there's a lot of states, by the way, who do that. There's a fail-safe. So again, is the bureaucracy in Ohio that much better than PA? God, I hope not. So there's things like that. So you see things like this, and especially uniquely here in Western PA, where maybe we have sister organizations in Youngstown and in Cleveland that are just across the border, where we work closely with these folks, and we're just seeing this night and day polarization. And again, another example that I said earlier, as we get to the Reggie conversation, is just another wow.
I was just going to toss that to you.
Yeah, so we'll stop. I'll stop my comment on that.
I know you've been dying to talk about energy.
Not at all.
But we can move on to that because I think, like we said earlier, it is very intertwined with the economy here. And so moving on to energy, Southwestern PA is rich in natural resources. Both in Harrisburg and Washington, though, have taken great steps to limit carbon emissions. And like you mentioned, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, is a cooperative of neighboring states that are trying to reduce CO2 emissions from the power sector. It's the first cap-and-trade investment regional initiative in the United States. Talk about what a threat that is to energy production and how the current policies and regulatory barriers to energy production and consumption here in Pennsylvania, combined with inflation, are impacting specifically jobs.
Yeah, I'll take a swing at it.
And we'll move back the other way.
So it's terrible, right? Is anyone not familiar with Reggie? You've heard of this term before, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. For those maybe not as familiar, like the broad level, it is this sense of cool kids club that the previous Governor Wolf wanted to be a part of, at the complete detriment of
Not so
Pennsylvania.
cool kids, though.
Yeah, well, according to him, yeah, thanks, Senator. It's a cap and trade, and he's trying to, and these guys could speak at this much better authority than I can on its processes, but honestly, he's trying to impose a tax, which the Constitution I read says he can't do that. It's the job of the legislature that gets to control these things, and that's why we elect these folks to represent us to do those things, so no one can rule like a tyrant and do that. But he's trying to do it anyway. Now we're kind of in this weird limbo. Is it not? Whereas Governor Shapiro going to come out. Now Governor Shapiro had said on the campaign trail that he was against it, but now mum's the word and no one can get him to say a single word one way or the other about it. And he's been asked on several occasions that I know of on, hey, you just need to come out and, oh, yeah, I got you. Nothing. Politics, right? This goes back to your question on why businesses do not trust government, because they say one thing and do another. But when you talk about jobs, this Reggie thing, this is not a left versus right issue. In fact, my organization is part of a coalition called Power PA Jobs. It is a mix of business and union. In fact, one of the biggest folks against the Reggie organization is the AFL-CIO. And just their members will lose around 8,000 jobs in Pennsylvania alone if Reggie's introduced. And what it's going to do is it will shift. It's a tax on energy producing power plants, right? And it will shift them from happening here, and it's going to move very simply to West Virginia and Ohio. That's as far as they have to go. So any concern about any pollutants or emissions sort of thing, which, by the way, to be noted, Pennsylvania has made greater strides in reducing emissions than any of the states currently in the Reggie partnership. No one talks about that. But it's going to increase average costs on about 70 to 80% of those existing coal power plants and 40% on natural gas power plants. I got a lot of info on all that, but it's also worth noting that there was, let's say it's about a loss of 2.87 billion in economic impact. It'll create 539 million loss in employee compensation. And those that make up the energy sector, by the way, it's somewhere, 60,000 direct jobs, 500-some thousand indirect jobs within the oil and gas sector just in PA. Put this into perspective. Listen, I was a Pitt guy, but this is the number someone gave me once. So Beaver Stadium, right, Penn State. If you filled that stadium 5 times, that's how many people that would affect in Pennsylvania directly if you got rid of this. So do I think that's a good thing? Nah, not even a little bit.
Well, and it sounds like not only are there deterrents to growth here, but
Terrible.
there's magnets to growth right around you, and just sort of enticing and luring people away from bad policy to better policies that will be more prosperous for them. I'll have each of you talk about Reggie, but also we know that when Joe Biden took office, gas was about $2.81 a gallon. Now national average is about $4.50, or in Pennsylvania is about $4.50 a gallon. While you can't control a lot of things at the federal level, there is a state gas tax. Is there an appetite to repeal that? What is that looking like, and how will that play in the future?
So we talking Reggie or gas
Both.
tax? Okay.
Both.
So both. I just wanted to
Whatever
say
you wanna
that,
comment on.
one of the main things about Reggie is that Pennsylvania will be the first energy exporting state to enter the compact. Okay, that everything else, every other state that has entered that compact has been an energy importer. So it really doesn't affect them because it's a tax on carbon producers. So it doesn't affect them. So if you ever look at the map, because we were fighting with Governor Wolf on it, he talked about how embarrassing it was that Pennsylvania was this hole in the middle of this compact, that we were the only ones not to enter, okay? And that is because it would inversely affect the citizens of Pennsylvania to the tune of $650 million a year. And who pays that? All of us. You know it, and I know it, and Governor Wolf and Governor Shapiro knows it. We're the ones that are on the hook for that. So we're talking about in reducing inflation, and we're talking about trying to spur the economy. That is the #1 killer of a prosperous Pennsylvania, okay? So the gas tax, the biggest issue with the gas tax that we have to, call out the elephant in the room is the fact that it was an imperfect plan whenever it was implemented in, what was it, 2012, right? Okay, it's an imperfect plan. Why? Because technology increases and we have more fuel-efficient cars. So therefore, if we don't keep increasing the population and keep increasing cars on the road, it will, the tax that we keep bringing in will lessen. And then you have, people like my friend here to the right that are buying electric vehicles and not getting taxed on it, okay? And those are the types of things that we really need to look at. Now, when I first was sworn in, a month later, PennDOT put a plan out to start tolling bridges and, random bridges. And they're sitting there and telling me that they wanted to not tax the citizens of Pennsylvania, that they were trying to get, citizens from out of state. However, they put one on 79 down in Bridgeville that's nowhere near West Virginia. So, and all the other ones across the Commonwealth, we're in the middle part of the state. So, we had to fight against that. And that was a total money grab by the Department of Transportation. So luckily, with some help from friends in this room, we were able to stop that. But don't think that PennDOT isn't looking for other ways to raise revenue. And that's what we're all fighting against. So we put a lot of stopgaps out there to make sure that something like this would never happen again. If they want to toll bridges, they're going to have to come to the state legislature, because in the Constitution it specifically states that the legislature is responsible for taxing the citizens, not a bureaucratic appointee. So,
that's well said.
I'll let you respond to being called out publicly
I will.
for your
I'm
EV
prepared to
first,
respond.
and then you can respond
it's a nice
to
Well,
car.
to-
It's a very nice car.
So it's a nice ride. But I haven't paid for gas in 5 years. But I do have a new driver in the house. Mackenzie's here with us today, so we're paying for her gas now. So we're making up for it.
And I drive a Bronco, so I make up for
He
both.
makes up for it. So. Well, the good news is these problems are interrelated. So, the reason that we need a gas tax, or we have had to make a choice on a gas tax, not we, but in prior sessions, is because our economy is not producing the tax revenue to pay our bills. And the way that as conservatives we know we can alternatively pay our bills is by growing our economy and creating an industry and tax-paying jobs. And so we've got to focus on that as the root of the problem. And Reggie is a part of the root of that problem. And Governor Wolf says it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that he has done this to a state, and that as a exporting state of energy, that we're a part of this compact that is diminishing our growth, lowering our trajectory, and causing us to have conversations about what to tax next and by how much, so that we can pay unemployment taxes. Well, let's employ those folks. Let's get them to work in the energy sector by repealing Reggie. We should have done it in previous administrations, but we've got a new governor now. When the government is front and center, and they used to call, Governor Wolf King Wolf during COVID and because of Reggie. Well, when the governor and his administration are front and center, that's not a democracy, right? That's a monarchy. We've tried that before. It didn't work. We didn't want that. When the people are front and center, and when jobs and families are front and center, that's a democracy, and that's what we want, and that's what creates free market growth. So, regardless of what you drive, you should be able to get it for as cheap as possible for what the market provides it for, without, overwhelming government overreach. So, thank you.
Love it. So that's a perfect segue into labor, the labor market here in Pennsylvania. And, Joe Biden is out there talking about Bidenomics at the national level, and I think we maybe interpret it differently than he does when he talks about it with a sense of pride. Maybe we see it very differently. But Bidenomics has left workers with less of everything except for more uncertainty. He's working on passing the PRO Act, which is protecting the right to organize, which would boost and enhance the power of unions and collective bargaining. It would also subject flexible work employees to an ABC-style test that would prohibit a number of independent contractors from running their company and business the way they want. I'm a lifelong Californian. We passed something terrible called AB5 back in 2020, which basically limited the capacity of part-time workers. It was the Gig Worker Act, basically, and required California businesses to hire them as employees instead of contractors. So you can imagine it not only created loss of flexibility for workers, it raised costs for everybody who was involved, and deterred companies from hiring people who they couldn't afford to bring on as employees. Now, in California, which is so far left, this was such a bad idea that in the same calendar year, the legislature there, which is a Democrat supermajority, they changed their own law saying that they would exempt certain people like real estate agents, insurance agencies, and attorneys. And in November, Californians actually put on a ballot the addition of excluding people like DoorDash and Uber and Lyft and gig worker, people like that, overriding AB5. So this is a path that other states have been down. Harrisburg is looking at similar legislation to the PRO Act, and that would, how can we put a stop then on these attacks on freedom of people to work a gig, a side hustle, something, and not to be bound and strangled by the regulations of full employment.
Yeah, Peggy, let's be honest, it's the exact opposite of Reagan's vision, is in his state of California to be prohibiting free market jobs and economic activity and saying that you can't be your own boss. Like, that is very un-American in my opinion. And when, the economy in California that produced amazing innovations like Uber and Lyft, that state wouldn't recognize that the free market economy that created those opportunities and those jobs would now be snuffed out and limited by this piece of legislation that would say, as an individual, you cannot and should not be your own boss and be a contract worker. Here in Pennsylvania, we have trucking companies, and some folks are represented in this room, that have come to us and said, look, my trucking company is entrepreneurial. We want our owners to feel like they have the opportunity to grow into their own business and bring their own truck and be a contractor with us, and that's a key part of our business, and it's how we staff our fleet. And if we do something like the PRO Act here, like California did, it would snuff out those opportunities and make the cost of labor that much higher, the cost of transporting goods that much higher. So it would have real negative effect. You wonder why folks want to do this? Again, it's a different vision. It's the antithetical to Reagan view that America and Pennsylvania needs to be employed by an employer who knows what's best for them, who often is tied to government incentives. And it's those negative forces of government that work against prosperity. In Governor Shapiro's inauguration, he cast a vision that did include this type of government control, and he called it real freedom. And he said it again and again while we were sitting there watching. And he said, real freedom is when your government can take care of you. Real freedom is when you have free health care from your government, and when you have your rights guaranteed. Some government protections are important, right? That's why we have government. But an overreach and an inappropriate role is when we redefine freedom as government assistance. And that's where our trajectory as a country will really start to lower, and we will no longer be able to produce the types of innovations like Uber and Lyft and like our transportation companies here that do. And one last point on kind of the union interference or piece to that is that in the transportation industry, very recently, we had a national story about a historic trucking company called Yellow that was the third biggest in the nation, and went out of business because, in large part, their union wouldn't negotiate appropriately with them and took them out of business. And that same union put on their webpage a tombstone with the company's name on it.
Wow.
And they lost 30,000 good paying union jobs because they wouldn't negotiate in good faith with that company. So we have to be very cautious about those types of forces in the economy, often tied to inappropriate government incentives. And we talked about the monarchy analogy. We don't want the government to be scattering gold to a few. We want opportunity for everybody.
We're going to take questions from the audience in just a minute, but before we go to them, Michigan, which is nearby and has a similar political composition, they had and then recently repealed right-to-work legislation. Is Pennsylvania discussing that? How would that benefit the Commonwealth here?
You want to take that?
Oh, I was going to.
Well, so I mentioned union interference. The way I would talk about right to work in Pennsylvania is that we are very far from any opportunity to pass something like that. We have public sector unions and we have private sector labor trade unions, and the trades provide a lot of value because they're entrepreneurial and because they take care of the training for their members. And in contrast to the public sector unions, which often are directly tied to government legislation or government administrative payments. And you all read the Journal, I'm sure, very closely. Yesterday there was an article published about a government-controlled wage increase for one particular union. It was the Municipal Workers Union, and it was a 20% raise, 20%. That's not a private sector raise because the private sector is not doing that well right now. And certainly the types of jobs that municipal workers, which are hardworking people, but we have to be very cautious about that inappropriate relationship where that same municipal workers union paid over $1 million to Governor Shapiro's campaign. And not to get political, but it has political and economic ramifications, and it's important that we know about it. So those are the type of reforms that I would focus on. I think, for Pennsylvania, right to work is not appropriate at the moment, but there are reforms that we can take care of that will right the ship. And the first step is knowing what they are, acknowledging them, and looking at the impact, and knowing that it's real, but also that we can change it. That everybody who is impacted by it, and that's all of us, has to stand up and be counted and go to the polls and make an informed decision.
Yeah. And if you look at a big company like Yellow that could go belly up, you wonder who is advocating for and protecting the mom and pop shop and the individual worker who doesn't have a lobbying firm or even the great depth of company that someplace like Yellow had. And so that really is where it gets very concerning. If these big companies can go belly up like that, if big companies are leaving Pennsylvania like they are in California, you wonder, don't they see that? Don't they worry about the longevity and the life cycle of the labor force in these very blue states? Emily is going to run through some questions for us, and I think people have submitted questions in writing, and so I guess I'm going to hand this off to you, and then I'll close in just a minute.
I can talk pretty loud, but it's a big room, so we won't have me do that. But just to kind of get started, so a question for Representative Mercuri, Senator Robinson. A lot of people in this room are curious about your take on this budget impasse, semi-budget impasse. Can you speak to Lifeline scholarships, PASS, what that looks like, and kind of your predictions, your crystal ball for moving forward?
Absolutely. So I don't know if everybody saw, what was it, August 2nd, 3rd, 4th? The Senate and the governor had finally agreed to just about 85–90% of what was in the budget so that we could continue to keep moving Pennsylvania forward. The issue was that Governor Shapiro ran on the fact that he wanted to help kids who were stuck in failing schools have an opportunity to get out of those schools and be able to change the trajectory of their lives. We agreed. He negotiated in good faith with the Pennsylvania Senate, and we agreed with him on it. And we broke for session, and no more than what? I think it was less than a week. He just said, oh, "Okay, I give up. I'm getting too much pushback." And it
From
was,
the public sector union.
exactly. And it was, it was pretty disappointing to us, to say the least. Like I said, I mean, we had a deal, negotiated in good faith, and kind of led us to believe that this was going to happen. Now, keep in mind, that wasn't just the only deal pertaining to that. There were a lot of things that the other side wanted to give money to those failing schools as well. And so there was an entire package that was involved in that deal. And so he only struck out the one thing that we wanted, and we ended up giving, a lot more to what those failing schools wanted. So our issue and what we were able to kind of hold them accountable with were, we're going to use the fiscal code that we come and negotiate in the fall. That was typical. That we're saying, if the whole deal, the whole package should be renegotiated then, if that's what you're looking for. And that's why we came up with the 85%. So he agreed on that. He took away the entire package, and to be continued, let's say. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is on that issue in particular, that the losers in the broken faith that we had on Governor Shapiro's part are the kids. Mm-hmm. And that is really the tragic part about it. And it's the opportunity really was that a new program that would have been a lifeline to students in failing schools. I mean, imagine yourself or your student having to wake up every day and go to a failing school. These are schools oftentimes in the urban centers, which have challenges of poverty and gang violence, or in a remote rural area where there might be hard to attract teachers. But your students going to that school, and they're failing along with many of the other students. And it's not because the teachers aren't hardworking. It's not because the students aren't bright and promising. They are. It's because the system around them is very difficult and plagued with issues. And so what can we do as a society? We can say we are prepared to give a special opportunity for those students. They don't have to earn their way into a thriving school or Pine Richland or afford a private school tuition. They actually will have a life-giving opportunity scholarship, whether it's $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000. And we would have $100 million in the budget, completely separate from public school money, which, by the way, got an over $500 million increase in this budget alone. And last year, too, both record numbers, back-to-back, lobbied by the teachers' unions. And these kids continue to fail in those hardest-hit schools. We're talking single-digit proficiency in math, reading, and science. 1%, 2%, 3% of the kids can read at grade level, and we're ignoring that. And we're saying it's unfortunate, it's too bad, it's just a deal that we can't strike. Folks, it's tragic that we're letting it happen. So we had the opportunity. Governor Shapiro committed to it on the campaign trail and backed off after signing a deal with the Senate.
Sounds just like Reggie.
Very similar to Reggie.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Pattern.
yeah, it's something we have to continue to talk about, hold them accountable to, and we got to get help to those kids.
And on the subject of the budget, campaign promises, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, one of the follow-up questions is, there is revenue from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that is used to fund this year's fiscal budget, correct?
You're right.
It's in the budget.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Well, that was, I'm sorry, that actually during his the budget address in February or March, yes, there was $650 million that was allocated from the tax revenue that would have been brought in by Reggie. No, in June, the budget that we have just negotiated and what we've signed the 85%, that was out. He also had recreational marijuana, $1 billion from recreational marijuana in there too. That is not part of the budget for 2023.
So it's to your point, though, Emily, so that everybody understands, and what Devlin's pointing at is he's planning for Reggie to continue, and he's planning on recreational marijuana to be enacted, and he's including revenue lines in his budget from both of those sources. But the other thing that's important to know is that the impact of Reggie on industry is even more real. So there's no law that permits marijuana yet. And revenue streams from Reggie are tied up in court because we've contested it as legal, but he's planning on it, and the impact is real. U.S. Steel relocated in 2021 a plant that was going to be in the Mon Valley that, by the way, would have been the greenest, most environmentally friendly steel production facility in the world, and it would have created 1,000 construction jobs, and mostly trade jobs, and it would have also created about 100 recurring jobs for operators. But they decided, because of Reggie, because the signal that the governor was sending about the tax that they would have had to pay in future years, they decided to go, I think, to Arkansas in the south, and they created the same green steel plant, but they did it outside of Pennsylvania. This was in 2021, a Pittsburgh-based company, U.S. Steel. And you mentioned, my background, my grandfather's worked in steel and my great-grandfather in oil in Pennsylvania. There's no shame in that. These are good-paying jobs. That's what brought many of us to Pennsylvania. So, to think that we can just erase those kind of jobs, I think is wrongheaded. And I think the better approach would have been, let's welcome an innovative, historically relevant, and even greener steel company into this area, and let's grow the economy and get folks to work.
Absolutely. So we have time for a few more questions. If you have any questions at all for this fabulous panel, please use the question cards on your table. Mary Beth Cerrucci, our coalitions director, can come along and grab those from you. And before we move on to our next question, I just want to give a shout out to Mary Beth Cerrucci, Americans for Prosperity Coalitions director, and Kimberly Kaufman from Representative Mercuri's office for making this a fabulous event. So thank you both. So a question that I have here, and one that I would love to ask as well as someone who works in Harrisburg. We are currently at a 101 to 101 composition in the House chamber. Senator Robinson's laughing. It's a little bit cushier over there.
Slightly.
Just a little bit. Again, pulling out your crystal ball, what do you think is feasible to accomplish this legislative session? And again, we have until the end of next year. We are a 2-year session.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will take the opportunity, not to deflect, but to introduce a friend of mine who's here from the House, Representative Carrie Benninghoff, who came out. And I'm not going to put it to you, but thank you for joining us. And he's not only a colleague, but he's a chairman and one of our longest tenured members. So thank you, Carrie, for coming out and for your service. On the state of affairs in the House, we are at currently 101-101. There's a big race in Allegheny County that likely many of you are aware of. It's the county executive's race, and this is a race that is for the third most influential role in the state, based on the size of the budget and the general influence. So there's the governor, there's the mayor of Philadelphia, and then there's the executive of Allegheny County. So it's a super important election, and it's a highly contested election. It's going to be a close one. The person who is running on the Democratic side was a former state rep, and because of, this is my read on it, because of how intense the race is getting, she decided to step aside from her state House role. And it was a tight majority for the Democrats in the House for the first time in 12 or so years, too. So it creates a 101 tie in the House, and a special election has been scheduled for September 18th. So we won't go back to session, most likely, even though we should get back to work. And I would love to get back to work, in particular because they no longer have a legislative majority. So it would be harder for them to get things done. But the reality is, since they control the schedule and they control the voting schedule, they are not bringing us back until after that election's decided for Sarah's seat. So that'll be at the end of September. What that means is not only because of the later election, but also because of the tight majority that they have, is that we're not going to get much done in the way of new policies this year or even likely next year. It's just too tight of a majority. So, you know, the Senate is really the game in town in terms of driving a legislative deal with, you know, the governor and with the House Democrats. And, you know, as a House Republican, I'm fully in support of Devlin and the work he's doing. No pressure, Devlin, but it's all on you guys. So we're hoping that, you know, we'll get back to work and begin those negotiations. But I will say the reality also is that because of that bad faith deal that the governor struck or broke, depending on how you look at it, with the budget, it's going to be even tougher. So don't expect too many major deals or big pieces of legislation to come out of Harrisburg anytime soon.
Yeah, you know, the main thing that you have to remember is that we are a product of our environment. We're the ones that are sent to Harrisburg. So we need your help in flipping the State House. So we need to make sure that you call your family and friends and you tell them what's really on the line. And you tell them, you know, what we stand for and what is going to change when we have the majority in the House. Because right now the Senate is just a thin red line that's stopping a very liberal governor and a very liberal House from completely changing our way of life in Pennsylvania. And that's going to sell out Pennsylvania. So, you know, one of the biggest issues, practically every issue as we kept talking here, is that we keep having to raise taxes because we stayed in Pennsylvania. All of our kids, all these generations have left Pennsylvania for better opportunities. We stayed, and the tax burden fell on us. And they keep raising taxes on the people that stay instead of bringing more workers in so that the tax revenue can be shared throughout a greater population. So that's what's at stake. And if we lose the House next year, we've lost it for a generation. So that's what we're up against.
Well, I want to ask one last question of this panel, and I'm going to put a little bit of an optimistic spin on it. All right, so half of the property we're on right now falls in Allegheny County. 50,000 jobs have been lost in Allegheny County in 5 years. That doesn't include the rest of the state. What can the legislature do to help turn the ship, and where do you see opportunities for improvement?
Well, you know, one biggest thing that we fought against were the permitting reform. You know, we just witnessed $1.5 billion investment to the Mon Valley Steelworks just leave in thin air. They had been waiting for a permit for a year and a half. They had done their job. They had, you know, tried to make government work, and the permit was not denied. The permit was just never even brought up. Okay? So that the health secretary of Allegheny County got a promotion for it and became the health secretary for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And she was the only one not affirmed by the Pennsylvania State Senate. So that's the type of stuff that we're fighting against. You know, so we're trying to get more investment into the area. You know, the Allegheny or the Pittsburgh International Airport, that's another $1.5 billion. It's going to be a state-of-the-art airport, the only one that's actually on its own power grid. And the reason that is, and you know that none of you are paying a dime to that airport for the renovation to the airport. $1.5 billion is being paid for specifically from revenue of natural gas underneath the airport. So those are the benefits that we're going to be able to carry into the legislative process.
Yeah, Emily, I think things we have going for us in Pennsylvania, we've got our natural resources and we've got our people. And we've always had those resources, and I think we'll continue to have them. And so for us, you know, to talk about how we turn things around, and you know, it's important that we share with you the stark reality of what we're up against, and the fight and the challenges we have. But you know, to think about it like Reagan did, you have to be optimistic. You have to know that our values will win out because we believe that they're right, and that our people will overcome because they're good people, and they'll unite around those values and our cause. So I'm optimistic too. I think you know, we need to stand up and challenge the status quo in Harrisburg. We need to talk about these issues so that people understand the nuances and where they're being taken advantage of, and the way that some of the current policies are not working. And then once we have the opportunity, we need to enact better policies, including reform on licensing and permitting, and a lot of good ideas here today around the table. Part of, I think, the hopeful future is education reform. And we talked about Lifeline scholarships and how we had a close miss on that one, but it had never been that close before. So the other opportunity here is that we need to try again and keep at it. And I believe that we'll get over the goal line on that and other issues. And then once you have, you know, people who can have a chance and an opportunity at a good education and grow that part of our future, we'll be in a better spot.
When we talk about population loss in Allegheny County, I don't know about you guys, but I thought it was a bad sign when they removed the Heinz Field, named it after someone else. That's a bad joke. No, like the representative said, these are the guys that are doing the real work. I'm a talking head. People listen to my opinions, and they pay me to talk about that. I have the easiest job in the world. These guys actually are out there trying to enact policy on our behalf. And so I do thank both of you gentlemen for the time you put in, and I genuinely do admire anyone who's willing to put up their name and run for office and be exposed to the public eye, because as these guys may have learned, hopefully they knew it going into it, but I've worked with a lot of close friends who've ran for office successfully and unsuccessfully over the years, and it's not just them that get put at ridicule and stuff, but it's their family and their support systems, and those have to be strong as well. So it's also a thankless job. I imagine the most of the people that talk to your folks in your staff offices aren't calling to say, hey, you know what, Representative Rob, he did such a bang-up job. You know, it's usually to complain about something completely unrelated to his line as well, and there's probably something about DC or something like that. When I worked in one of those offices once upon a time, so I know what those calls are like. So I thank you, because no one probably says thank you guys enough. And I don't say that facetiously or to flatter you, because whatever. But I do genuinely admire those who do that. So how can we get better is to pay attention. What Senator Robinson said was it's important to have those conversations, right, with our circles of influence. I may never be able to influence those folks in the room here that don't know me very well on my policy positions or why I vote or to make sure I vote, but I can do those 6 people that are close to me, and each of you can do those 6 people that are close to you. You will be surprised and maybe frustrated when you have an honest conversation with those around you and you find out that they are not even registered to vote, and they often complain in the political process and they're not engaged. Be engaged. Being engaged does not mean complaining on a Facebook thread somewhere, right? Being engaged means providing education. We talked about all these stats of things, providing the education. We talk about things like what Reggie actually means. There's a lot of good resources out there. If you would like any of them, please, I'll give anyone my contact information. I'm glad to supply you with any and all of it on what the reality of these policies actually are and how they'll affect our generations. I am a father of young children. I would love Pennsylvania to be an opportunity where they stay. I plan on being here for a very long time, God willing. So how can we change things moving forward, be involved, and hold those in your circles accountable to that too?